We are so happy to have Elliot Kotek here to speak with us today and on the topic of humanity extended.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here. I was here last year as well, and it's always good to come back, and especially with a company like ours that really is about kind of bringing makers together to do stuff. And what we try and engender is this spirit of like, okay, cool, we're all building cool stuff, we're all doing amazing stuff. Now let's try and make it so that every time we think about building something or making something, that there's some sort of humanitarian aspect, some sort of person we can help at the end of it, whether that person's local or a million miles away. So Not Impossible was started by two people. One is my co-founder, Mick Ebling. He's kind of a 6'6" kind of creature. He's a big guy, he does a lot of the big talks, and I call him our action hero. Whereas me, I get to come to things like Maker Faire because I'm a lot more internet friendly. I'm a bit more of a web presence. If you put Mick's name into Google and press images, you get that. But if you put my last name into Google and press images, you get this. So a lot more meme friendly, a lot more happier face, especially when you've got such a friendly make community. You don't want to kind of upset anyone by having a 6'6" bald guy walking around and harassing people. So what we're about is, as I said, technology for the sake of humanity. And how it all started was about this guy, Tempt1. He's a graffiti artist in LA, one of the great urban taggers. He had this great signature, great scrawl. And he started feeling a little bit of tingle in his legs when he went out for a run one day, and he found out that he had ALS. And what that meant was that, you know, we all did the Ice Bucket Challenge last year, but a lot of people still don't know what that means. Like, what does ALS mean? Well, it means you're completely paralyzed. The only thing you can move is your eyes. It doesn't affect the eyes, right? So at the time, he could still communicate. He had a ventilator put into his throat so he could no longer speak. But he could communicate by blinking his way through a system of letters, just like the story Diving Bell and the Butterfly, if a few of you might be familiar with that one. But the problem is that Diving Bell and the Butterfly was back in the 90s. And if you think about it, here's Tempt, 2008, sick in bed, and he's still using the same technology, when everything else we've done, every other piece of technology has grown in completely, like, just leaps and bounds. I mean, we went through from a Mac computer, a laptop that looked like that one on the left in 95. It had 500 megs. It couldn't even hold a movie. What could it do, 500 megs? We wouldn't be able to do anything with that computer today, right? I kind of joke that it was running off OS Gerbil because it was so old, right? Versus Leopard now, like in 2008, and of course Mavericks and Yosemite, which far surpass what we were able to do in 2008. But that's how the speed of technology and the speed of what we're able to do. And now we've got $9 computers being shown here at Maker Faire. We've got Arduinos and Raspberry Pis that are making things super easy. So why couldn't we make things a little bit easier for Tempt? That's what we wanted to know. Why can't we create something to help him communicate, right? So what we did is we brought a group of hackers and makers together from all over the place, and they got some cheap sunglasses off the Venice Beach boardwalk, some infrared lights, LEDs, hacked open a Sony PlayStation camera at the time. Now you'd be able to use any number of 100 different web cameras and reduce the cost even further. But for a couple of $100, he was able to get this pair of glasses that read his pupil movements, right? So he was able to blink to put the pencil down or blink to turn it on, and then blink again to turn it off. But in between, as he moved his eyes, the camera would read his pupil movements, so he could draw. This is kind of what it looked like if you're looking at his eyes. So he could draw on a computer screen and it would read his eye movements. So he's there completely paralyzed, only able to move his eyes, and he's able to draw using his pupils. And this went onto a computer screen, and then the computer screen was connected to a projector in the parking lot outside the hospital, and it was projecting up onto a wall. So he was lying there in bed, completely paralyzed, drawing, and out the corner of his eye, he was doing virtual graffiti on the side of a building opposite his hospital room. And that was just done just because it was something we thought should be done, that Not Impossible wanted to do. And there was no kind of greater reason around it other than to hack something. And it ended up becoming a really huge success. Tempt wrote to us afterwards and said that it was the first time in 7 years that he'd felt like he'd been able to breathe, that he'd felt like he'd been held underwater until that time. And you can imagine for an artist, for someone who needs to express themselves, that for 7 years not being able to draw anything must have been incredibly debilitating psychologically. And it ended up as being one of the top 50 inventions of the year from Time magazine and Gizmodo, and everybody kind of covered it, and it led to TED Talks, and anyway, it had like 500 million impressions. And that started the psychology of, okay, well, what is not impossible? What do we stand for? What can we do next? And the whole thing is that everything in history was considered impossible at some point. I mean, everything on your person now, like a cell phone and the laptops and all the communication devices, are obvious. They were all impossible at one point. But even like manufactured clothing in an industrial setting, or if depending on what you believe, and if you go far back enough, walking upright was not considered possible at one point in time, right? So nothing is impossible. It's just a question of time, the right place. And so last year, which is why we came to Maker Faire last year, is that we had a project called Project Daniel. And that all started because we received an article from Time magazine that someone sent us, and it told us this story about this doctor, an American guy from New York, who was out in Sudan's Nuba Mountains, this kind of war zone in Sudan, and he was operating and serving a population of about 1 million people, about 750,000 to 1 million people. And one of the people that he was serving was this kid named Daniel. And Daniel was this boy who had both his arms blown off when he was out tending his family's goats. And it's a pretty innocuous region. It's just this part of Sudan that no one wants. But these people have been there for thousands of years. And the president of that country doesn't want them there anymore, and so he's trying to push them out. So they're not military, they're not anything, they're just civilians. And a bomb blast went off, and he protected himself by ducking behind a tree and held onto the tree. But that protected his body, but didn't protect his arms. So that really got us thinking. Mick, my partner, has 3 sons. I have 1 little dude. And we're like, what can we do to help this kid, this at the time 14-year-old kid, who in that Time magazine article said that he didn't think his life was worth living anymore because he thought he was going to be such a huge burden on his family. And we had just written an article on our website about this guy in South Africa named Richard Van Aars, who built something called the robo-hand. He's a carpenter, and he accidentally chopped a few of his fingers off in a carpentry accident and got out his MakerBot and designed fingers for himself. And eventually, it was like brilliant. It's like perfect maker mentality, right? Let's make something. Let's make something that goes in this space that I now have. And he developed the first robo-hand. It's now been downloaded 50, 60,000 times. It's at the Smithsonian Institute, but it was the first 3D printed prosthetic hand. But we did what we do, which is bring hackers and makers together. So we went to this house, and there was Mick and an engineer from New York, this guy Jeremy, who came out, and our friend Brooke from Sacramento, who actually is the CEO of PrinterBot. He came down with a bunch of his printers. And Bilal, who's a designer from San Francisco. David Petrino, who's a neuroscientist and physical therapist from Australia, who lives in New York as well right now. My friend Adrian, who's an Oscar-level documentary filmmaker. A whole bunch of different volunteers came on by to the Make Weekend, where we were trying to come up with a solution for what to take, what to give to Daniel. And then, of course, we had a dog, because you always have to have a dog. And then we sent people out to Africa, and Mick went and studied under the Yoda. The guy who cut his own fingers off is the guy on the left. That's Richard Van Aars, and that's the robo-hand he's got with him there. And so Mick spent a week there not knowing how to build a hand before getting there, and went to this refugee camp called Yida. The UN call it the most challenging camp in the world. It houses about 65 to 70,000 people, and that at the time was where Daniel was living. So the first introduction, we set off on this thing called Project Daniel. We actually didn't even know if he was still around and where he was, but between the time we committed to the project and the project happening, Dr. Tom at the hospital found Daniel in Yida. So we went to Yida, and we didn't know what his response was going to be, but this is what happened. Let's see if we can get this to work. see if we can do that again. There we go.
Daniel was 14 when the bomb took his arms. I read the article about him and had to help. I came to Sudan with 3D printers, laptops, spools of plastic, and the goal to build Daniel an arm. You ready?
Ow! Oh,
And then Daniel fed himself for the first time in 2 years. But it's never about just one person. You just double click. So this is the hand, 90 degrees. If we could teach the locals to do it themselves, the project could live long after we left. And it did.
Pretty cool, right? Nice. So the coolest, thank you. The coolest thing about that is that in the year plus since then, we've started to see so many people like do things like this. So, you know, a couple months we saw Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man present a 3D printed little robotic hand to a kid, and it had like 4 million views within like half an hour. You know, it's like become part of our culture now, that we're looking for ways to use 3D printing and ways to do these things in our communities that go from helping just one person to having these open source files and sharing things in our communities, and which is very much about what makerspace and maker communities are all about, is having these open source files where things can be made better, and that if we just help one person and show that in a way that's inspiring, then other people can go online, download those files, and no matter where they are in the world, either if they've got their own printer, they can do it too, or they can connect with companies like 3D Hubs that become a resource of where all the 3D printers are and who owns them, and people can opt in to saying, hey, if you need a printer, I'm over here, and you can get stuff done. And we've started seeing a lot of these stories on our site, which is not impossible now, and people write to us from Brazil, hey, I watched the video, I downloaded the files and helped a kid in my community. And then just the spirit of that, like in the top right, there's a little girl in Vietnam who watched the video. She's a quadruple amputee, and the thing is that she just now knows that people are working on these solutions. And if you walk around Maker Faire between the exosuit and people inside printing out you know, other 3D printed limbs and prosthetics and all sorts of other fancy things, we know we're on the cusp of this, people being able to help themselves world that's currently taking place. When I was at Maker Faire in New York, there was a kid who built a Segway that could hold someone. So you had people zooming around in Segways who otherwise couldn't even stand up. So it's like taking an exosuit and then like amplifying it to the extreme of someone being able to shoot around 40 miles an hour down a street, and usually they're bound to a chair. And all this is just part of a culture of permissionless innovation. And that's what's so cool about the whole maker movement, is that we now no longer need to be part of a massive institution. We don't need to work for GE and Intel, although they're all, kind of great companies, but we don't need to work at those companies in order to have the tools to innovate. If we want a 3D printer, we can buy one, we can make one, we can go online and get one within a couple of days, we can go to a Microsoft store and buy a MakerBot pretty easily. If we don't know how to turn it on, if we don't know how to use it, we can go and watch a YouTube video. And if we want to know how to put together certain files and build CAD and do all these other things and we have no idea, we just go in a chat room and ask people, and soon enough you've got this community of people either in the physical world, which is why we come to places like this, or in the digital world when we're at home, and they're all allowing us and enabling us to make these devices ourselves. And so part of why we come to Maker Fairs is really just to drive that point home, that when you're out there making stuff, when you're out there considering, hey, I'm going to build this better bottle opener, well, sure, go on, build that better bottle opener, but have it be able to be opened by people who have all sorts of difficulties in their real world. Think about the people most vulnerable in your communities and what they might need, and what they might need that you can make, or that you can join with other people to make. And so we always like to ask, just for us, it was who's your Daniel, but then for you, it might be who's your Danielle or who's your Don, and that was what led to our next project, which we released in February of this year, which was a project called Don's Voice. And it kind of took us back to those beginnings with Tempt, who had ALS. Similarly, Don was also paralyzed from ALS, and he is a farmer in Canada. So it doesn't even need to be that you need to go to Sudan. You don't need to go half of the way across the world. Here at home, we have plenty of people that are struggling. Some people have the resources to get the things that they need. Some people don't. And Don was a farmer in Canada, and he got sick with ALS back in 1995, which now is 20 years ago. But it was a time when we were all setting up AOL and Hotmail accounts, things that none of us, or very few of us, still have now. But he missed out on that whole thing. He missed out on the personal computer revolution. So he too was used to using a letterboard just like Tempt, because he was afraid of technology. He never had that interaction. And so for him, we put together a little project with our volunteers again, thinking that we could come up with something, and it was called Don's Voice. And this is what that looked like.
When I look at Don, that could be my uncle, that could be my dad. What right do I have to do nothing about it?
I was listening to the CBC radio and I heard Mick Ebling being interviewed about the Eyewriter.
My name's Mick Ebling, founder of Not Impossible Labs. Everything that we stand for is this concept of technology for the sake of humanity. As soon as I found out about Don and Lorraine, I knew that Not Impossible had to give Don his voice back.
My name is Javid Gangji, and I'm an engineer and a volunteer for Not Impossible Labs.
The goal of the device was to create something that actually allowed Don to speak audibly with his family. Conventional, off-the-shelf eye tracking solutions did not work for Don.
I asked Lorraine to send me his letter sheet.
And that's exactly what I'm doing in my program, looping through the letters. And when he's ready, he looks to the middle, and voila, his word is there. I made Don a promise that I will find an answer that works for him specifically.
We want to help Javid to be able to develop this so he can help other people. That's the main motivation.
My dear Lorraine, I can't imagine life without you. You have made the last 25 years fly by and the last 20 with ALS more bearable. I am looking forward to the next 25 years. I love you, Lorraine.
Thank you. And again, the cool thing about this is, and this is something that I guess also transitions from how Maker Faire was like 10 years ago. It felt like the maker culture was kind of on the outskirts of society. And now it's really been so fully embraced that all of these things become part, for us, the way we do it, like financially, is we get big companies to pay for it so that we can undertake the projects. And then that way we can give away the technology for free because we don't need to sell it. So for Project Daniel, Intel came on board, helped us pay for the project, which meant that the files for downloading to print the arms were all available open source and are still available open source. And there are groups like Enable who are sending out volunteers and coming up with their own hands and arms and trying to make those even better and better. With Don's voice, that software, that spot, as you see, there was a little thank you at the end to HP. So HP helped us fund the project, which meant that we were able to give away the software as a freeware download for anybody, anywhere to download. And that's kind of the spirit of everything that we're doing right now. And what we've really found is that so many of these big companies are embracing it, and we're at the point now of no one really wants to be caught not doing something to help people if they can, right? It's almost become the culture now that if we want to employ people that have this mentality of helping. We want to employ people who feel good about their companies. We want to make purchasing decisions based off things that we know are coming from companies that do things outside of making their products that also help the people around us. And it's so much a part of the maker community that that's how we do everything. So we come up with an idea, we come up with a project, we come up with someone we want to help, and then we assemble a team of makers from all over the place, and they get together in Google Hangouts, and they advance the project week to week. We have people working on an exoskeleton now for kids with cerebral palsy to help them learn how to walk for themselves. And that is a device that's costing it's going to cost in all about $20,000 to make. But the current device on the market that does the same thing is $500,000. So us all, everyone in this room, everyone at this Maker Faire, we're all using technologies and all using skills and all learning little bits and pieces where if we can collaborate with other people, together we can make things that actually have an impact. So really that's what I'm imploring from everyone here, is to think of who that person is for you in your community, or to kind of go online and band together with others. You could be a high school student, you could be someone who's had 45 years in the business as an engineer or as a designer or as a cheerleader who just wants to get a project done. But I just urge you that if you're thinking about making anything, try and make sure that it has this humanitarian component along with it, or at least that whatever you make is able to be used by the widest section of the community as possible. I think we do have time for a couple of questions.
Yes, we have a couple minutes for some quick questions, and then if we have questions beyond that, we can have a few moments outside with Elliot to ask. So there's a microphone right in the middle. If anybody would like to come up with some questions, feel free.
Cool. And so, yeah, if you've got any questions, come to my, okay, there, yep, go for it. How do we get our ideas to be activated? Yeah, so the good thing for us is that because the Eyewriter was such a success, and we had no ties to any company when Not Impossible did the Eyewriter, but it received so much attention that when we went to go and do Project Daniel, we were able to then call up a whole bunch of companies and say, look, we've had this success, we've had this viral success that led to awards. Do you want to be part of something like that? Here's our idea. And so that's when Intel came on board for Project Daniel. But it took a while to convince them. And what we did at the time is we were like, look, you guys spend $400,000 on a commercial. That's ridiculous, right? That's insane to advertise a product. Give us half of that and we'll fly people to Africa and build a thing and leave everything there, and then we'll also make the content and deliver you the content, you know. And so we provided them with like they had nowhere to go. Like they would have had to say, no, we don't believe in humanity, as an argument against what we were offering them. We're like, this is going to be super cheap and it's going to do so well, and the buzzwords are all about 3D printing right now and you need to be part of this. Right? And so they signed up, and that Project Daniel had like 1 billion media impressions over the course of a year. It was in every major, you know, CNN, you know, Sanjay Gupta, like Deepak Chopra, like all these kind of influencers and all these people were talking about it, and that made them feel good. And then when there were some awards around it, so they got to celebrate those awards, which made them look even better, which made them want to do it again. And so thankfully, as a result of that, and that's kind of what the whole, you know, a big part of what we do is that we kind of think that if you're helping someone in your community and you're helping them by using some open source software that you've developed, or some little workaround, little MacGyver solution that you came up with, share it, right? Communicate it. Because if it stays within your bubble, you've helped one person and that feels awesome. But if you give the ability away to somebody else to then do it too, and that has an impact that can help many, then it can change the world, right? And so that's kind of the mentality behind it, is like we started off as a discount kind of operation, and now we're like, okay, now you know it works, let's go again, let's go again. And so we've got a sponsor around the cerebral palsy project, and that's a 3-year deal because it requires R&D. We've got all these other projects. We just, this weekend actually just presented something called the Brainwriter over at the Smithsonian in DC, which is actually was something that we invented for Tempt, because Tempt was blinking to turn on and off his software to draw, and he's now losing that muscle too. So we had to switch out that blink mechanism with a think mechanism, so they're EEG waves that are calibrated to enable him to turn it on and off. And so that's called the Brainwriter. So it's like all these things, they're all kind of finding their iterations. There's 3 Indian kids who came here from India who are in the row next to the food hall, next to the homegrown village, and they've got a wheelchair that's operated by EEG. So someone who's completely quadriplegic or whatever can be in that chair steering their own chair forward, which is pretty amazing. But they've got the prototype here, and it just shows that that's what the culture's about. And if we can take all those little bits and pieces and all those gadgets, and maybe, yes, they make little cat ears move up and down, but if we can have them for people who are disabled be able to choose what they want to watch on Netflix or anything like that, then we're helping humanity through technology. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Elliot.